All right. Good morning. It's Friday. And man, the Tamster just tells me that we may get snow tonight. I'm like, seriously, this is a crazy world that we live in, right? I mean, nothing makes sense anymore. But it is what it is, right? And so here we are. And I'm looking forward to the day. I'm off. That makes me happy. I got a lot of writing and stuff to do. Just kind of doing some organizing of some things and thoughts and plotting, always plotting. And so I got that to do. We have a funeral today for one of our local firemen in the same department that Jackson, our son, works in. And so kind of a sober time for that. It's always sad when you see, I mean, he's a believer, so good on him. But, it's just life's hard, right? So we'll be doing that. And then tonight we got a retirement party to go to with some in-laws or Tammy's family and my in-laws, and we're celebrating, people changing new seasons of life, and that's always exciting. So we got all that looking forward to, and then we'll see what happens tomorrow. What kind of trouble we can get into, but for now, we're going to look at the Book of Acts, chapter 18. And man, I so enjoyed yesterday's study. I needed that. My heart needed just to be encouraged that in how God encouraged Paul, and we learned some principles there, don't we? And so it's the little things that matter. And so we're literally just going to kind of comment as we walk through this end of the deal. There's so much here, and I think it's just nuances and interesting things that we're going to see. It takes a bit of time to put together kind of a thought process when you're doing narratives like this, because there's one word that pops up, and you think, okay, well, let me chase him down and see who that was. Because if there's a word in the scriptures, if there's a name of someone, you kind of want to know what's going on. So it takes a minute, to chase those down and just to kind of put placement of, okay, where's Paul now when he goes here, and what's he writing? Because in the book of Acts, it's the record of his establishing churches, but all the books of the Bible, like Romans and Corinthians and Thessalonica and Philippi and Ephesus, Galatia, all of those, they were stops along the way. And so you kind of want to see what's happening. So you're having to really look at the broader picture of the entire New Testament just to study a few verses. And so there's a lot that goes into that. And of course, I love geeking out on all of those things. And so here we are. I don't want to waste any more time. Let's just kind of look at it. So it says after the events, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. So Paul's discouraged. Remember, he's by himself. He's discouraged because of so many things, just the beatings and all of that. And I'm sure his mind is playing tricks with him as he's walking, whether he's walking by himself, riding by himself, whatever he's doing, he's making his way down because he's had just some difficulties all the way through. So he gets to Athens, doesn't see a lot of fruit, gets to speak in the Areopagus, and they didn't really pay that much attention. There were a few people that got saved. So Paul says, I'm going to Corinth. And so he gets to Corinth and he's worn out. And we know that because of what the scripture says, that he's of what God says ultimately to him. He says, you don't have to be afraid any longer, but go on speaking and do not be silent, for I'm with you, and no one will attack or harm you. I have many people in this city. So the fact that God has to slow him down long enough to say, hey man, you can breathe. You got nothing to fear here. I love how the Lord, man, he'll put us in a battle and it'll be hot and furious, right? We've been in those. And then he'll pull us out and go, hey man, just breathe. It's okay. I appreciate the way God has done that in my own life. You probably have seen the way he does that in your life. So this is a season where Paul is weak and he's fearful and he's just worn out. And he rolls into Corinth. And so we saw this yesterday. I just want to kind of do it. Paul now is encouraged. Why? Well, because he met some new friends, right? And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. We know eventually they'll probably be the ones who establish the church in Ephesus. And so they're key players in what's going on. But he doesn't know that yet. He just knows that they're inviting because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. So they're just refugees in Corinth having left Rome. Made their way as tent makers, and Paul goes, oh, wow, that's a coincidence. I'm a tent maker too. And so it strikes up a friendship. I love how God orchestrates these things. Don't miss the little things in these scriptures. Slow down long enough. Let's just enjoy that. And so he came to them because he was of the same trade. He stayed with them, and they worked together, for they were tent makers by trade. And Paul was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath and trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. So Paul's kind of he's got a little haven now. He's staying in the home of some friends. He's not just a stranger. He's friends. They're co-workers, fellow believers. And so he's going to the synagogue every Sabbath, doing what he does, persuading Jews and Greeks, and he's tent making. So he's working by day, going to the temple on the Sabbath, preaching in the synagogues, and persuading people. And then it says, verse 5, when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. I realize we looked at all that last week. Yesterday, I just wanted to see that. So, what are the little things, man? He's given them friendships, new friendships. He's given him work, which is helpful and healthy. It just gets your mind off of things. It's a powerful thing to do. There's production that feels like you're not spinning your wheels. You're doing something. There's old friends that show up, and those are always good. You can't make old friends, right? So you got to keep those. And Silas and Timothy. He's getting greater clarity because look what it says. So he's devoted to Christ, but then what does it say? Verse 6, to the Jews and to the synagogue full time. But when they resisted and blasphemed, he took out his garments and said to them, your blood's on your own hands. I'm clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. Well, that's where God was sending you to begin with, right? And so his method was to do both. There's clarity now. He's like, okay, now I think I'm done. I think I'm going just to the Gentiles. So God gives him clarity in this thing. And I love it when God gives clarity. Clarity is an incredible thing. It's kind of like putting Windex on the windshield. All of a sudden you see clear, right? You go, oh, this is where we're trying to go. You ever try to get off on the interstate at night when it's raining and you're trying to find those exits and you see signs, but you can't see the road? Clarity is that opportunity when everything clears up and you know exactly where to turn. This is what's going on with him. So he's got that. Now he's seeing fruit of ministry too, because listen to this. It says, Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, verse 8, believed in the Lord together and his entire household. Many of the Corinthians, as they listened to Paul, were believing and being baptized. So he's seeing fruit. And man, that's an encouraging thing. So here in Corinth, the leader of the synagogue gets saved, Crispus, and his whole family. And then it says, there were many others who got saved as well, and Paul was believing, and they were believing and being baptized, and so you're seeing fruit. That's a good thing. I love it when listen, I don't mind the downtimes. I learn a lot in the downtimes, but I love to see fruit of ministry. I love to see that happen. And so when you get in that season, man, it's rich and rewarding, and hang on because it won't last all the time. But this is what's going on. Then it says, and the Lord said to Paul by a vision at night, verse 9, don't be afraid any longer, but go on speaking and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you or harm you, for I got many people in this city. Now, that's an incredible deal there, right? So now God himself encourages Paul through a vision. Ever have God speak to you, even though things are going well, and all of a sudden he speaks to you, and you go, wow, I needed to hear that, right? And it could have been a word from somebody else. Could have been something you read. Could have been a thought that God dropped in. Maybe some of you heard it audibly. I don't know. But those are powerful things when they happen. He says, hey, man, relax. Don't fear. And then he throws out this little tidbit. I got many people in this city. I don't know if he means I got many people in the city for you to reach, or I've got many people in the city you got friends all over you don't even know about, right? God has his people everywhere, right? We're not strangers. We are in the world, but we have a household of faith, and so we have a big family in this world. Anyway, so enough of that. He says, so he's there a year and a half. Now, it says, near the end of this year and a half, it says this, verse 12, this is where we start new today. But while Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews rose up together against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat. So Paul now is, he's going, okay, I'm done with you. I'm going to start preaching and to the Gentiles. And so he's just going around Corinth now talking to the Gentiles. And he's seeing them converted, and there's great stuff going on. And the Jews are still upset with him, probably because he stole their synagogue leader and other justices who live in the house next to the synagogue. So there's just got all these. They're seeing their neighborhood and their place kind of fall, in their words, to Christ, right? And so they're upset. So they go, hey, let's just take him to Rome. Let's be done with it. Let's get the Roman court to put out an edict that says Christianity is bad, and then we don't have to worry about it anywhere anymore. We can just shut the whole thing down. And so they drag him to court. Now, and they're saying this man is inciting the people to worship God contrary to the law. They're saying, hey, man, listen, we want you to understand this man's trying to teach people to quit doing the rules that we've got in place that Moses taught. But when Paul's about to open his mouth and give a defense, and he's pretty excited, I'm sure. Hey, let me tell you what's going on. Because he's going to preach Christ to this proconsul. But when Paul was about to open his mouth, God shuts it through Gallio. And Gallio says to the Jews, listen, if it were a matter of some serious crime or vicious or unscrupulous act, right? If there was something terrible going on here, okay. It would be reasonable for me to put up with you, right? You can see Rome's distaste for the Jews already, right? You can see that it would be reasonable for me to put up with you, right? But if there are questions about teachings and persons in your own law, like it's just about names like Jesus or Moses, and it's just about rules, I don't want anything to do with that. You can have it. So they were shot down just like that. He says, I'm unwilling to judge of these matters. And he drove them away from the judgment seat. Like, get out of here. So the judgment seat was kind of in the, like in the Areopagus in that sense. And the proconsul would be there, and they would come, and there was a seat, and they would just come and make their cases. Well, he's like, hey, get them out of here. Just send them out of here. So now the Jews are all kicked out. Now listen to what it says. But they all took hold of Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue, and began beating him in front of the judgment seat. Now, Sosthenes, remember, it was Crispus who was the leader of the synagogue. Now it's Sosthenes is the leader of the synagogue. And so apparently this new leader of the synagogue, Sosthenes, thought, hey, he may have been his idea to drag it up to the court to get a ruling. They didn't get it, so the Jews get upset, and they just beat him to death. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Sosthenes' name will pop up again in Ephesus, where Paul is writing back to Corinthians and speaking. And the very first phrase he uses in his letter to the Corinthians is this: Paul the apostle and Sosthenes greet you. So here's what they beat him up, and then Paul's like, hey, bro, you want to talk? And so Sosthenes comes to Christ, begins to travel with him down to Ephesus. At some point, he meets him in Ephesus because it's there where Paul is going to write that first letter to Corinthians, and Sosthenes will be there with him, as though he's somebody, like he's a ruler of a church, like he's overseeing that. Crazy stuff. Incredible just to see how, I love how God turns things, right? And this is what he does. Now, so we come on down. It says, but they all took hold of Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue, and began beating him in front of the judgment seat. And yet Gallio was not concerned about any of these things. So he's just at the judgment seat, right? He's sitting there, and they're doing this. All of a sudden, they lose their ruling. They start beating the mess out of Sosthenes, and so the Gallio, the proconsul, just looks at him and goes, okay, whatever, and so he goes on about his business. There's a guy getting beat up, and he doesn't care. And so it's a crazy atmosphere that you see. Now it says this: now when Paul, when he remained many days longer, took leave of the brothers and sisters and sailed away to Syria, and Priscilla and Aquila were with him. So he stayed there a good bit longer, but listen, I mean, he sees, okay, my time's up. I'm heading home. I'm heading to Syria, which is where Jerusalem was and all of that. And so he grabs Priscilla and Aquila, and they go with him. So his original friends are like, hey, man, we're coming too. We'll start a business there, right? So we're in. Right? Don't you love how God creates partnerships, and at the beginning you never would have seen it that way? You just, hey, we're making tents, and they gave me a place to stay. And then there's this friendship that develops, so that when Paul's like, hey, I'm heading out, they're going, hey, you know what? We're coming too. Or maybe Paul said, hey, I'm coming. I really need y'all to come with me. Whatever it is, God works through relationships, and he works through people. And it's important that we see it that way. And so he says, so he takes leave of brothers and sisters and sailed away to Syria, and Priscilla and Aquila were with him. But first had his hair cut at Cenchrea, for he was keeping a vow. Now, that kind of threw me, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I remember vows. They're in Numbers chapter 3 where they make a Nazirite vow. And so in that vow, you let your hair grow. And then at the end of the vow, you cut your hair. And then you take the hair and you present it to the priest. And there's some series of things you go through. I don't want to get all into that. But I want you to understand that Paul, while he was in Corinth, had created a vow, kind of separating himself, a consecration to the Lord. They do it for two things. One, to celebrate some victories that God has done, and so they just want to acknowledge that by consecrating. And other times is because they're desperate for him. And so they're separating themselves out just to get greater clarity and all of that. So for whatever Paul's reason, and maybe it was, hey, thanksgiving and gratefulness to God, or it was, hey, God, I want more clarity. Whatever it was, and it's probably what drove him back down to Ephesus and all of that. Paul let his hair grow out. It's just interesting that in the middle of this verse, and Paul had a haircut. Really? I mean, I'm writing the scriptures. Haircut isn't something that you would think, hey, he had a haircut. Hey, he wore a white deal today, or he had this for food, right? I mean, there's a reason why those things are in the scriptures. So Paul had first had his haircut at Caesarea, for he was keeping a vow. So Paul's ended his vow, which meant that he had separated himself from all sorts of things, alcohol and other aspects of things, dead things. So there was a vegetarian type diet. It was all of this stuff was going on. He's gone through all of that. And he's come out on the other side. And so there's just that good, healthy reminder about that. Now, then he says this in verse 9. So Paul's gratefulness, I guess, is the point of that, right? We should realize that when God is being fruitful to you, man, that's a good time to draw closer to him. That's a good time to be grateful. It's a good time to just establish it, count your many blessings kind of thing. Hey, for the next 30 days, I'm counting my blessings, man, because God has been gracious to me. Or for the next 30 days, I'm zeroing in. I like where I am. I'm in this zone. I want to go deeper in this zone. So I'm gonna remove everything that could distract. I'm gonna zero in on the Lord. Whatever it was, Paul had done that. And so then we find that he comes out of that, and it says they came to Ephesus, and he left them there. Who did he leave there? Well, Priscilla and Aquila, right? Hey, great. Hey, it's good to see you guys. I'm in Ephesus. Man, why don't y'all camp out here and see what can happen? Now, we know that they were there for a bit, and that there was a church that was established because Paul writes to that church. And then Paul eventually makes his way there, and it's a very significant church built by lay people. Not by the apostles, not by necessarily his proteges like Timothy and Silas and those, but a couple who were laymen who go in and they plant a church in Ephesus. So let's avoid the whole separating out, like you've got professional Christians and you've got all the rest. It's not that. God uses all sorts of people. God could use you to start a church. God could use you to start a ministry. God could use you to do some incredible things. Never discount who you are and where you are in light of the fact that the King of Kings can take you at any moment and put you exactly in the spot you need to be to accomplish some great things for the kingdom of God. And so we should see things like that. Now, then it says, they came to Ephesus, he left them there. Now he himself entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews, right? So that he's going to the synagogue and he's going to reason with the Jews. And so they're partnering together a little bit there, and then he leaves. When they asked him to stay longer, he didn't consent, but took leave of them and said, I'll return to you again if God wills. And he set sail from Ephesus. And God willed. And Ephesus became a pretty prominent church in Paul's ministry. And he spent a lot of time dealing with them, writing to them. And the book he wrote to them is a primer on, it's like condensed everything about the Christian life into those 6 chapters. It's an amazing book. It's my favorite book in all the scriptures. And so we see that Paul partnered with Aquila and Priscilla, visits in the tabernacle, in the synagogue, sees people come to Christ, hands them over to them, and he takes off. Now, it says, when we landed in Caesarea, he went up to Jerusalem and greeted the church, right? So he goes, hey, man, I'm back. Just want you to know everything's cool. Did my little journey. And then he goes down to Antioch, and he's resting there. And so that's where we'll leave it today. And so he'll begin his 3rd missionary journey, but we'll wait till Monday to see the 3rd journey. But, man, what a great study this has been. Lord bless you guys. Enjoy your day today. And, man, just be grateful and see how God will bring refreshment into your life today. Just start looking for it and expect it to happen because he always does that. Lord bless you guys. I'll talk to you soon.